Merry meet. In this lecture, I will be explaining to you the difference between a hex and a curse. There is always a lot of confusion on these two terms and unfortunately a lot of misinformation. Let's start with the term curse. This is a term that most Wiccans never use. Plain and simple, it goes completely against the ideals of the Wiccan traditions, which were created by Gerald Gardner. The main focus when it comes to Wicca is that Wiccans do no harm. A curse, plain and simple, is harming another person, or more to the point, wishing harm onto a person with a focus of intent to have that harm happen. Everyone has that moment in life when they wish something bad upon someone else. This is a part of life, a natural reaction, and human. This is not a curse. You get pissed off at someone who did something rude to you, or someone cut you off in traffic, or you stubbed your toe on the recliner. Your natural reaction is anger. That is a human reaction to a negative situation. That is part of life. And though they call them curse words, they are simply a release of negativity. In magic, a curse is a form of negative magic. What this is, simply, is taking all of the negative feelings you feel and releasing them at a specific person, place, or thing, with the intent for that negative energy to cause more negativity to happen, or to hurt another person. It is the all-out negative force that a person would put onto another to cause misfortune to happen to that person. And it doesn't stop there. A curse has to be constantly fed by more and more negativity coming from the caster to the person they cast upon. If the curse is not fed, then it fades. So how does this work when we talk about long-lasting curses from generation to generation? If a curse is fed continuously, eventually that negativity will begin to feed itself. This is where we see things such as cursed objects, or even cases of poltergeist activity or negative hauntings. Negativity attracts negativity. So when an item has had so much negativity absorbed into them, it starts to attract more negativity and starts to feed itself. In order for a massive amount of negativity, a person would have to be having to hold on to those negative emotions for so long that not only does a curse damage the person who is being cursed, but also the person who is doing the cursing. And on top of that, we understand that energy attracts more of the same energy. So if you are cursing someone, then you're only bringing more negativity onto yourself. Now we understand that a curse is a focus of negative energy, but what is a hex? The main thing to understand with a hex is that it has absolutely nothing to do with a curse at all. It is not negative magic, though it can be used negatively. One of the better papers that I feel really helps us understand this term was written by Minnie Aaron, and she writes, "Where a hex can be used negatively, there is more to hexes than that. In fact, hexes are not negative magic at all. They are actually manipulative magic, and there is a difference." A hex can be used to help. When we place a hex on someone, it can be used to help keep a person from harming themselves or others. Of course, you always should go through the proper channels when you are working with any form of protective or manipulative magic. With a hex, you may be doing something for the greater good, but it is important to look at the full picture and outcome before anyone simply says no to any form of magic. You are never going to know until you are in a situation on how you might act. Another form of the term hex comes from the powwow or Amish traditions. The hex sign is placed on the outside of an Amish home or barn to protect all that is inside. The hex here is protective magic that is used to deter those with negative agendas to cause harm on the property and people or animals within the property. By using a positive spin on this, we are stating the same thing as the negative idea of a hex. Where there are many Wiccans who feel that a hex crosses the line because we are interfering with the person's will, it is done to protect. So a hex is a form of protection magic that will keep a person from doing harm to themselves or others. The hex derives from Norwegian roots, mainly Germany and Switzerland. It was brought over to the United States in the 17th century by immigrants who settled in Pennsylvania and were termed the Pennsylvania Dutch. The peaceful citizens of the settlement worked together with the Native American tribes and formed a folk magic that is called powwow magic. Where the hex is usually considered a form of protective magic, the grand scheme of things, it is a form of manipulation magic. It is used to control another person and make them act in a way that is not in their nature. This can be used on ourselves as well as others in a way of modifying our own behavior as well. How the hex got its bad rap is due to the fact that also in the 17th century, there at the end, was the Salem witch trials. Anything that was not seen as Christian was seen as evil, and since the hex was a form of folk magic, it was seen as non-Christian, even though the Pennsylvania Dutch, and by this point most of the Native American tribes, were Christian. This aspect was seen as evil and were simply lumped in with the term curse. One thing I would like to point out is the term manipulation is like the term hex and has gotten a bad rap from the misunderstanding of the term. When we think of manipulation, we automatically think negative. But what I'd like to use as an example of a positive manipulation would be the idea of a child safety locks. I don't know if you have children or have friends who have children, but a simple example of how a hex works. Let's say we have cleaning supplies under the sink in the kitchen, and these can be harmful if a child sees the pretty colors and thinks, oh, soda pop, and tries to drink it. So the invention of the child safety lock was invented. You install these in the cabinet door, and the child tries to open it. They cannot, so they go check something else out. And that's what a hex does. It's manipulating the person by diverting their attention onto something else. And this is where we're discussing when we say manipulation. Now, this is not to say that people using hexes are not wanting to use the more native form of manipulation, but the main purpose of this type of magic was the positive version. So, as we can see from Ms. Aaron's paper, a hex is simply a way to modify a person's behavior when we need or want a person to act contrary to the way they plan on acting or how they normally would act. Negatively, a hex would be used to force a person to behave in the way they normally wouldn't in order to get something you want to have happen. Things such as a love spell that forces a person to love someone they don't would be a negative form of a hex. If you are wanting someone to leave a job that they are good at and qualified for because you simply don't like them or you want the job for yourself, would be a negative form of hex. Positively, a hex would be used to help a person do something to protect themselves or others around them, to help someone choose to get help rather than hurt themselves or other people, to get someone to not go back to an abusive relationship. Many people can hex themselves to help them quit smoking or drinking or stick to a diet, modifying a behavior to help them save themselves or to help them not act out and harm others. Now, yes, where there are those who will argue that even the positive reasons can take away free will, and because of this, many Wiccan practitioners will still not use a hex because of this reason alone. However, here we get into the idea of ethics or reads. Sometimes we have to do things in order to help a situation out. Not everything is black and white, and there are those gray areas that we have to consider at times. As Ms. Aaron mentioned, we see from powwow traditions in the Pennsylvania Dutch people with the hex signs. These are placed on properties, quilts, papers, and just about anything. These symbols were used to protect the people and animals who lived on the property to keep them from harm, to help encourage love and happiness and health. Again, it helped the people to care for themselves and others, and if a person who came into contact with the symbol had a mind to harm or cause issues, it would modify their behavior and make them not want to do that. A hex can only be used on humans and animals. The idea of manipulation has to do with emotional connections. So these things that do not have emotion, such as a building or an illness, cannot be hexed. There is a statement that those who cannot hex cannot heal. Now what this means is that you cannot control a person's behavior to help them choose to work with you and to choose to take care of themselves and follow doctor's orders, then you cannot heal properly. If you are not willing to help the person modify their behavior, then your healing techniques are not going to go far. I do hope that this lecture has helped you understand the differences between a curse and a hex. Mary Part.